Hey Matt, finally getting around to posting a video response. Out of all the exchanges that we've had before, I'd say that I agree with you most on that video than any other video that we've done. Now, you raised again a lot of very interesting points here, and one of them was obviously this second person approach. Now, there are a few things that I want to say about this. Firstly, I agree with you. Perhaps it is the right way to go, because objectivity isn't this grandiose master of epistemic truth that we'd like to think it is sometimes, and perhaps some of the dogmatic materialists like to think this. I don't think this at all. I realise, again, as you said before, that observation is an act. It's observation isn't just this passive receiving of facts. It's participating in the environment, and we're becoming to realise this more than ever. And obviously, consciousness as a subject matter has this property of reflexivity that I think permeates the whole of science, but it really smacks us in the face when we begin to study consciousness. So this is where I think you're onto something with the second person approach to consciousness. I mean, we do like to think that objectivity is sort of out there, when really, as I've said before, objectivity is merely subjectivity that we can all agree upon. Objectivity isn't similar to Kant's definition of the noumenal world as opposed to the phenomenal world. If we're going by that particular definition, at least for simplicity, objectivity is merely an aggregate of the phenomenal world. It's things that we can agree that are true, which does actually lend itself to the scientific method, but it also tries to take the view from nowhere, when of course you can never take a view from nowhere. The fact that objectivity and the scientific method thinks that it can write without any ideology is an ideology in itself. You can't, of course, separate cultural, historical, social, political, economic factors from the role of science. And if once you take a historical perspective a little bit more, and you look back, you will see that these influences permeate the nature and progression of science rather than any particular truth value. So right now we're beginning to break down objectivity just a little bit, which it needs to be done, because I mean, if we're to explain consciousness, not only can subjectivity not be what we think it is, but objectivity itself needs to be called into question to perhaps fill in this explanatory gap, and perhaps it can be filled in a little, or perhaps some progress made along the way with the second person. Maybe the second person bridges the explanatory gap. Let me just give you a little example of how this might work. I'm sure you've had similar thoughts. Now, as I discussed before, objectivity isn't something grandiose and out there. It's a very involved process. It's historical and it's social. It's the interrelations. It's the peer review process, and the peer review is merely one person's relationship with a set of data, and it's the other person. So the object is defined entirely by the interrelations of the subjects. So in that way we bridge the distinction between second and third person by saying that perhaps third person isn't out there but is an aggregate of the interrelationships of you and me, second person. So once we accept that third person is closer to second person than we once realized, the task then is to relate first person to second person. And this is where I think social constructionism really comes into play. I mean, this social constructionism as a theory in psychology says essentially that, you know, I am defined entirely by my relations with others. It's the social nature of the self. In fact, it's only through communication with another person that I am granted my personhood. There are many thinkers that have these thoughts. I think even Varela says something very similar. And Dennett, Vygotsky, there are many people thinking along these lines. You'd be surprised at the quote from Dennett that says it's through the interrelations with other people that give us this personhood. So that's a very intersubjective approach, because we are defined by our relationships with other people. Everything that we take for granted is, by definition, part of someone else, making everyone a part of everyone else. Everyone is very interconnected, and this is what I was saying before about materialism doesn't have to be very reductionist, because we can take this type of approach with it. So therefore I think we can see that third person and second person are sort of codependent and interrelated, but as are first and second person. So there is very much a continuum between the construction of the individual via the medium of interrelations, intersubjectivity and social exchange, and the construction of the object through social relations, through intersubjectivity and social exchange. They both have at their heart a second person approach. So I really think you're onto something here. But another point, again, this is where I disagree from you. I'll depart from you here. Is that you still think pan-experientialism, if there is somewhat of a revolution, perhaps it will be pan-experientialism. Now, just as much as I agree with you on the second person, which I think is a very, very good consideration to make, I think I stand by materialism, and I think that pan-experientialism has some problems which I highlighted before. I'm not going to go into them again, but I think if a revolution of consciousness does happen, I don't think it will be pan-experientialism, because I don't think it particularly answers the questions that materialism or certain views of materialism answer either. I think essentially, as you said, it's materialism, and if we are to have a scientific revolution due to the fundamental study of the nature of consciousness, it will be far more radical than either of our views that we have at the moment. But like I said, at the moment, I don't know if a revolution is possible or if it's indeed entirely needed. But I really, really do applaud your emphasis on the second person, which has really got me thinking now. So anyway, I'm going to go off. I hope to hear from you soon, and maybe we can discuss this a little bit further. Take care. Peace.